Hey, thanks for being here. We are so glad that you have chosen to spend this morning here at West. If you are newer to the West community, we would love to know that you're here. There's a VIP tent out in the Commons area as you leave, and we'd love to know your name, your email address, your cell phone number. If you'll give that to us, or even if you don't, we have a free gift for you. And then you can choose whether you opt into hearing from us again or not, but we would like to know that you're here. My name is Andrea Smith. I have the privilege of being the pastor here. I'm also known as Mimi. I'm very excited to celebrate that. The Jones family are watching, very sleep deprived, but they are watching worship with us this morning. JT is one of our worship leaders, and Lane is our children's catalyst and communications catalyst, and does a lot of things. We're realizing now that she's not here anymore, how much she does as a job. So, Lane, you've definitely got some job security when you come off of maternity leave. But so Dawn and I are holding down the fort, and some amazing volunteers that Lane worked really hard to put in place. So first of all, if you're one of those volunteers, a huge shout out and thank you to you for making the ministries happen in her absence. And also, there are just going to be some things that Dawn and I cannot keep up with. And so we wanted to make you aware of a few of those things, like we're not graphic artists. And so Lane did that for us. So the Friday emails that you get, it's going to have a lot of text. And that's just it's just going to be the way it is. And so just give us a little grace over the next several months as she has maternity leave and that kind of stuff. And I'm trying to figure out how I get some Mimi leave, because I would like to spend some time with that small person. But thank you for the love and the support that you've shown them. It's been a journey this year, so we're so grateful that it is what it is. And so thank you for being their faith community. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about. We don't normally do announcements here, but I talk to you about relevant things. First of all, we support our college students in an ongoing way. So after worship out in the Commons area, if you have 5 minutes, we're packing the college student care packages for their spring, winter focus. And so if you'll go out there and just, there's an assembly line, volunteers will be out there and help put the stuff in the packages, that would be great. Secondly, and this is more relevant to our online community as well, a huge shout out to y'all this morning. We have been supporting Old Fort Elementary. We did Operation Santa Shop up there, and we promised them that we would not forget them. Last night on Facebook, I noticed that Megan, the PTO president, that we planned Operation Santa Shop, and Lacey and Susan, the other PTO officers, they're still not working on Old Fort Elementary. So later today, I'm going to post their post on my Facebook. Would you please like it? I mean, there are times we just scroll and we ignore things. I need you to like it. I need you to share it. They're trying to get the attention of the legislatures because no work. Old Fort Elementary was flooded, and it's a brand new school, and so they still have not gotten in there, and they really want to return to Old Fort when school starts this fall. And right now they're worshiping at, or not worshiping, they're going to school at another school, and it's less than ideal circumstances. One other thing, hopefully you'll be hearing from the missions team moving forward about this. It's an idea that we've had, but we've not fleshed out, that we want to share some love with them on Valentine's Day through some Starbucks gift cards. So you're going to hear about that a little later. And also, we are planning to have a back-to-school bash at Old Fort. So put that in the back of your minds. We do one here, working with our area businesses, and we host over 1,200 students to come and get new school supplies. So we're going to have one of those up there, and then we hope to have a spring fling with them. So those are the ways that we are continuing to be an intentional ministry for the disaster response folks. So please be aware of that. Online community, huge shout out to you. Love seeing you chat in the chat room, and grateful for you being a part of West. Today we are going to continue in our series, The Mountain is You. And it's some deep stuff, some heavy stuff, but hopefully some good and transformational stuff that we're going to walk through this morning. Thanks for being here. I am such an advocate for faith. Clearly, it's my job, right? I believe that following Christ transforms us. But I also am a huge advocate for therapy. I want to go on and say that what we're doing right now in these 6 weeks looking at this book is not a substitute for therapy. I am not a therapist. At the end of the series, we're going to have a Q&A with a very esteemed therapist that is a part of our congregation. And so we'll ask you before then if you have any questions based on this series and based on this idea of overcoming our mountain. And so we'll address those questions in that Q&A that will be our final message in this series. But someone 2 weeks ago shared with me, they're like, I feel like it's this much faith and this much therapy. And I'm like, that's really actually a pretty cool way of looking at it, because the whole point of church, of worship, is for us to grow in our relationship with God. And talking about real life things that we wrestle with, that's how we do that. I mean, like during Lent, we're going to dive deep in looking at the life of Jesus and very specific examples about Jesus and Christ. But, you know, there are 52 weeks in a year. And so for seasons, we're going to talk about things like our own mental health. Mental health is something that oftentimes, not as much as it used to be, but oftentimes it gets swept under the rug. And it's so important. When the rich young ruler was talking with Jesus, and some say he was trying to trip him up to see how he would answer the question. He said, what are the greatest commandments? And there were like, you know, several hundred that he was trying to get Jesus to narrow it down from. And Jesus said, well, you know, and he said this multiple times, to love God with all that you are, all that you have, and then to love your neighbor. There's the last part of that sentence, and the last part of that sentence is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. We're supposed to love ourselves, and whether we admit it or not, it's hard. We've got stuff. I recognized that earlier in the announcements or whatever when I was sharing with you some of the things that we're doing when I talked about Lane and JT and their new addition, and my voice got crackly. I hate it when that happens, but I'm an emotional, passionate person, and so sometimes it happens, because when I was standing here in that moment, and this is so, it leads into that video you just watched, and we all have this happen, so it's why I'm talking about this. When I was standing here in that moment talking about Lane and JT, I was overwhelmed with emotion. And I love Naomi. Frankly, I have not spent really any time with her. I wanted to give them their space as a young family. I do not want to be that mother or mother-in-law that's like hovering, and I'm so tempted to be, so I'm really trying to just cook food. That is my role in life right now, is to just help them by doing that. And then I'm going to swoop in a few weeks when JT has to go back to work, and I will be that person. But so it was almost just a year ago that they were expecting a baby. And then they went to the doctor's office, and the visit just did not go well. And so then over the next week, they experienced a miscarriage. And it was like gut-wrenching as a parent or as someone that loves someone so dearly, to hear that pain and emotion on the other end of the phone. And that has stuck with me clearly, because then just now when I'm like, oh, we're so happy to welcome Naomi to the world, I mean, that it triggered some stuff. That joy triggered that pain. And I guarantee you, I'm not the only one that has that happen. If you're old enough, and I know we are in this space and worshiping via podcasts and all that kind of stuff, and we're from lots of different age generations, but at some point, we're all going to experience that gut-wrenching life stuff. And it's going to hurt, and we're going to think we've processed it, and we're going to think we've wrestled with it. And then a little later, it's going to rear its head in the most inopportune times and moments. And you're going to be like, where did that come from? And Richard Rohr, Friar Richard Rohr, an Episcopal priest who is truly one of the most renowned and godlike theologians of our time, he says, unprocessed pain gets projected. Think about that. Unprocessed pain gets projected. And so when we try to bury stuff that's happened to us that's icky, if we're not careful, it gets projected. So I want to tell you a story. It's a personal story. I find in a series like this, it's fair to talk about myself than to talk about other people. I don't think anybody in my life wants to be talked about from the stage in that way. So pardon the moment of personal privilege. But Dawn and I went with a bunch of clergy to London, England back in August. And I was really excited for the opportunity. It was honestly, our former district superintendent put me on the leadership team for the district, so my way was paid for, other than a few $100s. And some generous folks rallied around Dawn and paid for her way, so it didn't cost the church anything for us to go. And we got to go and see where Methodism, United Methodism, which is what we are, started. And I was really excited for the trip to be able to experience those things, but I dreaded it a little bit too, because, I knew that the folks that were going, I didn't know any of them. And how many of you, if you'll clap for this, how many of you have an uncomfortable middle school or high school experience that just did not go well? Will you clap? So none of us are impervious to bad middle school or high school experiences, right? And so that's some unprocessed stuff we've all got carrying around. And so I had this anxiety about the trip. When I got to the airport, you're scanning the space, and I noticed this one pastor there. And, I have my own little world of cool kids that I admire and I want to be like, and I really respect them. And this one pastor that I'd respected for years, and probably, if I'm really honest and humble, I'll say maybe even a little jealous of. Not in an intentionally mean way, but she's got it going on. She's beautiful, she's smart, she's articulate, and she doesn't BS. What you see with her is what you get. So she's always been someone that I admired. And we don't know each other. We were only on that leadership team together for a few meetings, and then we got moved to a different district, so I'm not on that anymore. And so we didn't really know each other. And so we did that awkward hello, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes in those situations, I am socially awkward. And so I did not start the conversation as well as I could have. And it put her a little on the defensive. And I had no idea what she had been living through in her personal life. As the week went on, though, she opened up to me, and that's why the initial greeting did not go well. I said, "Are you staying out of trouble?" And that's just one of the things that I say. If I go greet somebody, "Hey, are you staying out of trouble?" Because I would prefer the answer to be no. I think we should be getting in trouble. I think we should be rocking the waves. If we're not rocking waves, we're not making a difference. And her eyes just, she shook her head at me. And I realized much later she was going through a very painful divorce. And she's a clergy person, and that's just not ever really "Oh, yay, pastor, getting divorced." That's just not how it is. And so I learned through that week where her life had been going, and it was just an interesting experience trying to get to know her and having that opportunity and that privilege. The next to the last day that we were in England, we were walking to where John Wesley had his heart strangely warmed. That's a part of the Methodism story. He was born into the church. He knew about God and Jesus from the time he was a baby. And his mom was one of the leaders of faith, even though back then in the 1800s, women were not leaders of faith. And his dad was a priest. And even though he grew up in faith, it had become very stagnant in his life. In his words, he was going through the motions, but not the feeling. And so after something had happened, he was walking on Aldersgate Street there in London, and in his words, he had been with a small group of people talking about faith and life, and his heart was strangely warmed. We call it the Aldersgate experience, but he had that aha moment. So I don't discount things like that happen in life, where things happen and conversations and interactions. So we're on our way to Aldersgate Street. And my friend comes up to me and just starts like telling me all this stuff to do. Now, I've got my own ego and am pretty strong personality. So when you start telling me what to do, if it's not in a collaborative way, I bristle. This is my own childhood trauma from a military father of 23 years. And so I bristled and I'm like, why are you doing this? And she's like, well, you need to have a vision team. I'm like, yes. You need to have an administrative board or a guidance team, a governing team of the church. I'm like, yeah. And you need key leaders. They need job descriptions. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I didn't just fall off the back of a truck and start being a pastor today. Like, I did found the church. I mean, and we're still viable. So why are you doing this? But instead of being honest, I just internalized all that and really sort of got my feathers ruffled. And I let her tell me all this, and it was just the weirdest thing. It was like she had this urgency of all this stuff she needed to tell me what and how to do and be. And I'm like, this is messed up. And so the day ended, and that stuff resonated with me. Now, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story at the end of the message, so I'm going to leave you hanging there for just a minute. But I want us to look at some principles, first from Scripture and then from Wiest, who wrote the book, The Mountain is You. First of all, take a look at this verse written by the Apostle Paul from the book of Romans. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's good, pleasant, and perfect will. And people love to misuse this Bible verse. In fact, back in the fall when Josh Pettit, one of our worship production leaders, put that we do secular songs on social media, it just created, because he has followers from a different area of his life, we got all kinds of flack because we sang secular songs in worship, and people just kept putting this verse up. Do not conform to the patterns of the world. Well, we're not. We're actually taking things that are of this world and seeing how we can learn from them and apply them to our faith journey. But Paul says, don't conform to patterns of this world, but be about transforming your mind. And so that's what I want us to ask this morning. Like, are we willing to own our stuff? Are we willing to look in our lives and see where some stuff is not working as it should? And are we willing to have our minds changed? Are we willing to be different people? Hopefully, that's the whole goal of faith and church, is that a year from now, you're going to be different, or even a day from now, you're going to be different than you were today. Every day is an opportunity for us to grow in our Christ-like manner. Now, I'm not going to ever be one of those preachers that stands up here and beats you over the head with a Bible or an iPad with the Bible on it, telling you this is how you got to do it. That's up to you. But align all of your morals and all of your values back to, are you being a person of love? And keep in mind that pronoun in there, are you being a person of love? Let's stop worrying about judging everybody else and whether they're love or not. Let's just worry about us. If we'd all start worrying about us, then the world would be transformed. Because sometimes when we pass that judgment, we're not being love at all. In this book, The Mountain is You, Wiest talks about, like, how do we conquer the paths of resistance in front of us? And the bottom line is, we've got to hike up the mountain. 2 weeks ago, I showed you the mountain that Tom and I encountered when we were in Iceland. And it was that middle school moment for me. I'm like, there's no way Miss Fluffy is going to make it up the mountain. I'm fluffy, I own it, more fluffy than I would like to be. And that's not self-deprecating. It just is what it is. I'll work on it, but I'm not willing to work on it as much as Tom does Mr. 70.3 Ironman triathlons. And so that's just our relationship. But like, man, that stuff was some inner deep trauma for me. And this whole mountain, it's up there, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do it. That's how we look at things in our lives. We're like, how am I going to get through this? And the answer is to actually just take the steps and do it. So what you see right now on the screen, this is an iceberg that we went hiking on. That was another little challenge. But anyway, it was a powerful experience, just very difficult. And you see all the different layers, and you see the dark layers in the mountain. That's all the stuff and the ice and the sediment. I think there's a word called strata, that it gets piled on top of each other over time. The same is true for us. Every single one of us in this space or listening online, we've got stuff. And it traces back to our childhood. And so if you're in your teenage years and you're listening to this message, like the stuff that you hear right now, it's forming who you are. So you decide what you want to hold on to and what just does not matter. The stuff that your peers say, it doesn't matter. You define who you are. But we all have this like subconscious part of ourselves that filters in the stuff that we've heard all of our lives. I told you I'm a daughter of a 23-year military Army veteran, and doggone it, he strove for perfection. I can make up a bed if I choose to, in a very mean and organized way, like you could do the quarter test. It was something maybe it's why I'm messy, because I had to be like so neat for so long. So Tom, there's your tip. But I'm so cluttered. I'm not dirty, but there's just stuff everywhere. But my dad said some hard things to me because he wanted me to be a certain way when I grew up. And some of the stuff he just didn't know, but it was damaging. Like I'd bring home a 96. He'd be like, why is it not 100? Okay, that's messed up. And it messed with my mind. Again, not maliciously. We all say things to one another that get heard in another way. That's called confirmation bias. Your brain seeks to hear the narrative to give proof to what you subconsciously believe about yourself. So those words that have formed like an iceberg of you, we've got to be willing to chip away at those. And that's what this series is about. And frankly, I mean, I can't give us all the tips of how and stuff like that in a message. That's not the point of a message. So I do hope that you'll read the daily meditations that we'll send out starting tomorrow again, and because they go along with today's message. And every single day has action items that we can do that come from this book and come from Richard Rohr and come from a place of faith and therapy mingled in with one another. But like we've got all these layers of stuff that we've heard and we believe about ourselves. And so then we have this thing called confirmation bias. And this keeps us from being people of peace. And if Christ were here with us, if Jesus were here with us, he would want us to be people of peace. So what's your mountain? I asked that 2 weeks ago. If you weren't here, I'll ask it again today. What is your mountain? Are you afraid? Are you angry? Are you frustrated? Are you hurt? What have you got in your life that you are wrestling with? So there's this thing called self-concept. It's what we all have of ourselves, and honestly, it's been in the making from the time that we were born. It's those words and those ideas that we've seen about ourselves, that we've heard about ourselves, that come together, and then we lean into them and we start believing them, and they limit us. And when we find places of pain in our lives, especially pain that is unprocessed, when we find places of deep pain, we go to the absolute worst place in believing what we believe about ourselves. And then we start living out of that. We start believing that we don't have any value, or we don't have as much value as we do. I shared with you in Friday's email, like, my stuff is that I'm not worthy, or I'm a burden. And so oftentimes, like, I won't be as forthcoming and as assertive maybe as I need to be, because I don't want to bother anybody or hurt. I should never want to hurt anyone, but like push people away. Because I come back to this like wounded self-concept. We've all got that. So I want you to do some wrestling with that too. Like, what is your self-concept? How do you see yourself? How do you think people would describe you? How would you describe yourself? And then weigh that against the image of Christ, which is one of being fully accepted despite our imperfections and being fully loved. That's the beautiful thing about Jesus. The people that he did life with were the most misfit group of people. He did not go pick the elite. He did not pick the Real Housewives of any city that show is about. He didn't pick the Oscar winners. He didn't pick the influencers. He chose the people that were normal, everyday people. Some were even shunned by society, like Matthew. He was a tax collector. No one liked tax collectors. We don't really like them now, but they really didn't like them then. Our CPAs in the congregation, we do love you. But, I mean, the people he chose. And so if that's who Jesus chose, he chooses you. So there's no self-concept or no image that, if it's not, I am loved, I am whole, I am a pretty amazing human being, then if that's not what you're saying about yourself, if that's not what your narrative is, then you need to let it go. And you got to figure out what mountain it is that you've got to climb to let those things go. And see, there's something that happens when you start climbing a mountain. And this is hard to hear, but it's the limit. And it's another one of the meditations for this upcoming week. Like, we all have this like inner limit. Think of it as if you've heard the metaphor of a glass ceiling. Like, break the glass ceiling. We've all got this limit, upper limit of ourselves that we've created. It's this level of happiness that we have based on whatever our life has been thus far. So when we're standing at this crossroads and we realize that we've got to go from point A to point B, and we've got to change. Remember those words from Paul? Do not conform to the patterns of this world. Do not conform to the patterns of this world that you have created for yourself. Patterns of mediocrity. Patterns of not living into all you are capable of living into and being. But transform your mind. Well, guess what? When we start transforming our mind, it gets uncomfortable. What does that look like in real life? Well, things that used to make us really angry, that don't make us angry anymore, we get in that space of happiness and we're like, whoa, this is weird. I don't know what to do here. So then we start self-sabotaging, which is what this book talks about so much. We self-sabotage and we get in our own way. I'm not supposed to be this happy. Something's not right here. So let me start poking holes in this to see where the weakness is. And so we end up putting ourselves right back in that negative space because we get wigged out when we're happy. I see this happen a lot with folks that lose loved ones. And then they find, especially by death, and then they find themselves in another chapter in their lives, and they're happy, and they feel guilty. No one that loves someone would want them to live the rest of their life lonely. And just because you love again, it doesn't mean you don't love who you loved first. So like in my experience with that, I share with folks, you're not loving them just because you found love in a different way and in a different time and in a different space. But that's what that is. That's that upper limit. Or maybe you've processed your grief. It doesn't make you a bad person to not be actively grieving in the same way now that you were when the thing that caused you the grief first happened. That's called healing. It's called resurrection. It's called hope. So these are real things that we need to hold on to. And if we will, it will change who we are. So I told you about my friend and the lecture, of how to structure a church and what to do and how to get you to be greeters. And, that was something we were wrestling with. We didn't have enough people on the greeting team. And honestly, that's one of the most non-invasive ways you can serve West is to be a greeter. You just have to say, hey, we're glad you're here. You don't even need to ask them how they are because you don't have time to hear the answer. So all you have to do to be on the greeting team is be happy or fake it. It's not hard. But we're struggling to get greeters. And so my friend was telling me how to get a greeting team. And I'm like, there's something messed up about this. I just don't know. So the last day we were there, confession, I have wine. We were having a glass of wine together. And she's like, I really hope you'll lean into claiming your voice. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, I really hope you'll lean into claiming your voice. You are a gifted leader. Lead. She's like, wear high heels. It'll make you feel powerful. There's something about that. Don't discount that. And I started thinking about a season of my life that led me to not lead the way that I did before. And I'm like, I think I have a mountain. And so honestly, this past week as I was writing the meditations and putting all that together, I don't ever ask you to do something, or I try really hard not to ask you to do something that I don't do myself. And I realized what she meant. The image that I was portraying to her was not the image that I think I carry. It was one of insecurity, lack of confidence, fear, people-pleasing, all those kinds of things. And that's certainly not who I think God called me or created me to be. So I had to do some peeling away of my mountain and recognized that some of my woundedness had not yet been processed. And maybe it was time to do so. It's a process, it's a journey. It doesn't happen with the snap of a fingers, but we've all got a mountain. And the transformation that comes once you make the mountain your pathway, it's a game changer. And you will experience life in newness and fullness. And you will experience resurrection. I hope you'll conquer that mountain. Let us pray. Gracious God, you know our mountains, perhaps even more than we know them. God, reveal the pathway to us so that we can take it, so that we can live into the space of loving you with all that we have, loving our neighbors, but God, also loving ourselves. God, help us wrestle with the stuff that's deep within. Help us give it to you. And then help us be more like you so we can make change and bring about love in this world. God, in our country this weekend, it could not be more divided, half and half. Some people are really happy and some people are really sad and afraid. God, let us, as your people, wherever we are on the spectrum, be a people of love in what we say, in what we do, and how we live. Thank you for being such an amazing and gracious and forgiving God. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I invite you to stand and sing. If you'd like to see, I have pictures. They're not putting out on social media, so you won't be seeing one of those big posts, but I'll just hold this as I greet you as you leave. That way you don't have to ask and hurt my feelings if you don't. Seriously, we've all got stuff. If we'll do the work, read the devotions this week and do the action items. When I did them as I was writing them, I'm like, holy cow, I got some stuff. And that was like 2 weeks ago, so I started really working on it. And oh my gosh, I feel lighter and stronger and more capable and bolder. The same will happen for you. God gives us that power. It's up to us to claim it. So this week, I hope you claim it. And I hope you climb your mountain. And you can pray the prayer, God, give me joy, give me anything, but you can bring the rain. It's a powerful God. Go in peace.